5. The Spoonbender and the CIA. He walked into the lab like a showman, confident but cautious. Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic who claimed he could bend metal with his mind, had arrived at the Stanford Research Institute in 1973. His mission no longer just stage tricks or late-night television. This time, the audience wasn't made of fans. It was made of spies. The CIA had brought him in under tight secrecy, intrigued by the buzz surrounding his abilities. Intelligence officials didn't care much about bent spoons, but if a man could manipulate objects or read thoughts, even under controlled conditions, then maybe, just maybe, the US was sitting on a weapon that didn't require a trigger. Behind mirrored glass, agents watched as researchers prepared the first round of tests. Geller had no idea what he'd be asked to do. That was part of the experiment. No cues, no coaching, just the cold scrutiny of science and suspicion. In one test, he was placed in a sealed room. Outside, in a separate room, a scientist picked a word at random from a dictionary and drew a picture that represented it, a firecracker. Geller was told nothing, no hints, just a notepad and a pencil. He closed his eyes. Minutes passed. Then he began to draw. When he was done, the sketch resembled a cylinder with sparks shooting out of one end. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to rattle the scientists and raise the eyebrows of the men in suits watching. The test continued for days. Targets were chosen at random: trees, animals, buildings, tools. Each time, Geller sat quietly, sketching whatever came into his mind. Sometimes the results were vague. Other times, they were alarmingly accurate. In one trial, the target was a bunch of grapes. Geller drew a cluster of round objects on a vine, even adding shading. Another time, he described a camel when the target was a desert scene. Were these coincidences, clever guesses, subconscious associations? The CIA couldn't say for sure, but the data they collected was enough to trigger a quiet conclusion in the final report. As a result of Geller's success in this experimental period, we consider that he has demonstrated his paranormal perceptual ability in a convincing and unambiguous manner. Of course, not everyone agreed. Some scientists accused Geller of stage tricks. Others claimed the tests weren't rigorous enough. The controversy swirled for decades. But the CIA didn't need public consensus. They needed possibilities. And Geller, for all his flamboyance, had delivered something that couldn't be easily dismissed. Years later, Geller would claim he'd once been used to influence world leaders, that he had even remote influenced the minds of diplomats during peace negotiations. True or not, his time with the CIA had earned him a place in the shadowy history of psychic warfare. He wasn't just bending spoons anymore. He was bending the attention of the most powerful intelligence agency in the world. 6. The sketch that made headquarters go silent. They were used to noise, intelligence briefings, phone calls, radio chatter, footsteps echoing down concrete corridors. But on that afternoon inside a secure room at Fort Meade, Maryland, something unusual happened. Silence, the kind of silence that falls when people witness something they can't explain, but can't ignore either. In the middle of the room stood a man in plain clothes, flipping through the pages of a report. In front of him, a sketch, a crude pencil drawing made by one of the program's remote viewers just 24 hours earlier. The sketch showed a large crane, several cylindrical structures, and oddly shaped buildings, all labeled in the viewer's shaky handwriting. The viewer had never seen the place, hadn't even known what continent it was on, but the sketch was nearly a match for a newly obtained satellite photo of a Soviet weapons facility in the Ural Mountains. Too close to dismiss, too weird to understand. That sketch would become one of Project Stargate's most whispered about success stories. The viewer in question was Joseph McMonigal, a former Army intelligence officer turned psychic operative. He wasn't flamboyant or mystical. He treated the work like recon, because to him, that's what it was. He'd been given a random number, just digits tied to a classified coordinate. No photos, no description. Then he'd gone into session, pen in hand, sketching whatever came to mind. And what came to mind matched reality. It wasn't the only time. In another session, a remote viewer described an American plane that had crashed in Zaire. The drawing showed jungle, twisted wreckage, and even the position of the aircraft's wings. A few days later, when a search team located the downed plane, The similarities were undeniable. There were sessions where viewers described underground tunnels in Libya, missile installations in North Korea, or the exact layout of a kidnapped general's holding cell. Not every session worked. In fact, most didn't. There were misses, big ones, vague impressions, conflicting sketches, wild guesses that went nowhere. But when the system worked, when a target was nailed with no prior knowledge, no outside information, and no physical contact, even the skeptics in the room went quiet. And that silence, that was the sound of continued funding. The program's champions knew they couldn't prove psychic ability in a way that would satisfy traditional science. But in the intelligence world, results often matter more than reasons. Even if it works 15% of the time, one official reportedly said, that's 15% more intel than we had before. Remote viewing wasn't magic. It was messy, unpredictable. But sometimes in the hands of the right person, it produced uncanny glimpses into places thousands of miles away. And in the strange game of Cold War espionage, even one good glimpse could change everything. 7. From spooks to soldiers. By the early 1980s, Project Stargate had shifted from strange experiment to strategic asset, or at least that was the idea. But the CIA, never quite comfortable with psychics and sketches, was ready to pass the baton. They needed someone who could deal with unconventional tools, operate in secret, and above all, follow orders. So they handed it over to the one institution that could do all three without blinking. The U.S. Army, specifically INSCOM, the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, a shadowy arm of military intelligence headquartered at Fort Meade, Maryland. There, deep within secure buildings, civilian psychics sat beside military personnel, now subject to uniforms, hierarchy, and operational discipline. The program was renamed several times: Grill Flame, Sunstreak, and eventually back to Stargate. But the mission remained the same. Use the mind as a weapon. The military didn't come in to end the program. They came to operationalize it. Where the CIA had tested, theorized, and dabbled, INSCOM wanted results. Now, remote viewing wasn't just an experiment. It was a tool in the intelligence toolkit. Sessions were scheduled like combat drills, briefings were conducted, mission logs were created, viewers were assigned to real-world targets, missing soldiers, terrorist plots, enemy bunkers. Many in the military brass were skeptical, some outright hostile. A program that relied on impressions, emotions, and unconscious imagery, that was a hard sell in a world of maps, missiles, and metrics. But a few believed, and those few had rank. Colonel John B. Alexander, for one, became a key advocate. He saw remote viewing not as superstition, but as asymmetrical warfare. If your enemy didn't understand it, couldn't see it coming, and couldn't defend against it, what better weapon could you ask for? Viewers like Joseph McMonigal were given military status. They wore fatigues, attended briefings. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense, but they served alongside them, viewing where drones couldn't fly and agents couldn't go. The transition to Army control brought discipline, but also pressure. Viewers were expected to perform, and quickly. Some found the structure empowering, others found it stifling. But all knew that if they failed to deliver, the program might vanish altogether. Still, the military integration yielded results. Remote viewing was credited with helping locate hostages, uncover foreign weapon tests, and even detect nuclear sites in countries far off the grid. The CIA may have sparked the fire, but it was the Army that tried to forge it into a weapon. Whether they succeeded or not is still debated, but for over a decade, psychic soldiers operated under orders as part of America's most unconventional Cold War unit. And while most military operations were measured in firepower and formations, this one was measured in visions. 8. The money that no one saw. Officially, it didn't exist. No press releases, no public line items, no speeches from generals or senators. Just a string of cold numbers buried deep inside classified appropriations, hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic fog. This was how Project Stargate survived for over 2 decades, not through scientific consensus or political support, but through money that left no fingerprints. They called it a black budget. Inside the Pentagon in Langley, everyone knew what that meant. Secret funds allocated for covert programs. No questions asked, no answers given. It was the financial dark matter of the national security universe. Remote viewing didn't fit neatly into any category. It wasn't standard espionage, it wasn't weapons development, and it certainly wasn't science in any traditional sense. To the outside world, it was a joke. Psychics in military fatigues scribbling sketches of submarines. But to those in the know, it was insurance. Insurance against the possibility that the Soviets were doing the same thing, and winning. So the funding continued. Each fiscal year, a small fraction of billions, mere drops in the ocean, would quietly flow toward offices in Fort Meade, research centers in California, and makeshift training rooms where viewers learned to see blind. No one outside a tight circle knew where it was going. Not Congress, not auditors, not even most people inside the CIA or Department of Defense. And that was intentional, because if word got out, if a senator or journalist discovered the government was funding psychic spies, it could trigger ridicule, scandal, or worse, a shutdown. So the money was renamed, reassigned, and rerouted. Sometimes it was listed under advanced human performance. Other times it was buried inside broader intelligence categories with vague descriptions like threat assessment or special operations support. Even inside the project, some of the viewers didn't know who exactly was paying them. They just knew their checks cleared and their clearances remained active. This cloak of invisibility protected the program, but also left it vulnerable. Whenever budgets were tightened or priorities shifted, Project Stargate was always on the chopping block. It had no powerful lobby, no mainstream allies. All it had were the classified results of sessions that defied explanation, and a few high-ranking believers willing to defend it in closed-door meetings. One year, the program nearly disappeared altogether. A budget analyst flagged the strange expenditures and asked for clarification. The answer came from a senior official with just 2 words: "Don't ask." And the line item vanished, not the funding, just the paper trail. That was how Stargate lived, hidden in the shadows of secrecy and silence, protected not by evidence, but by the very structure of the intelligence world. Need to know, eyes only, compartmentalized. In the end, it wasn't bad results that killed the program. It was politics, pressure, and the slow collapse of the Cold War paranoia that had birthed it. But for over 20 years, while the public debated bombs and treaties, another kind of war was funded. Quietly, invisibly, one vision at a time.